Everyone. Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to have Michael back, isn't it? He looks really good, and I love the energy. So great to have you back, Michael. So let's start with a silent meditation. So if you could please sit straight in your chair, your feet flat on the floor, and your shoulders relaxed. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Dots, Namo Dots, Namo Dots. Okay, and now we will go on to chant the Jusei Ge. If you could please join me. If you're using the book, it is on page 55. 라곤 조세간 이시무조도 시간 불만족 세프 조쇼각 가오 무료코大世主不再小兵具政府上昇学合詞上運動妙所長寺法空境未所門政府上昇学利欲人少年上映主本業死具無浄土一生天人師人力現代公不詳無才道少女三苦名交際集約難回避知恵言滅死根門案閉塞小悪道通達全宗門高僧上満足いよろじぽ1月修十期天候音符言一種解放像公正功徳法上大修十 세포 시시크 그여 이사이브츠 그속그 슈토크혼 간넨 지스조만 도크이 상가요 뇨부츠 무게치 스다츠 미프쇼 강가 그에딕 도시 사이쇼손 시간 야코카 다이센 오칸도 고쿠 쇼텐닌 도흐 진묘계 나만다브 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 간니시크도크 묘도 세이사이 도츠보다이신 오조 아라오 Namadots, 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 namadots. Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see so many of you back again. It has been kind of a jarring last few weeks. I'm sorry, I had a couple weeks off and then I became ill. I had the flu. Fortunately, I did not have COVID, which I was very worried about. But unfortunately, I missed the minister's boucan and I also missed the 125th anniversary. So that was a real disappointment, but at least I got to participate with those activities online. So I want to thank all of you for understanding about last week's service. I know that there were some technical difficulties with the Technohoyo. I hope that you'll be able to appreciate it online. It is, I believe, the last service is tonight in California. So they left last week and they've been doing approximately 6 performances in California, both in San Jose and originally in LA. So thank you for understanding that that was live and we got to participate. And I'll be talking about that experience because the experience of having the Japanese ministers here for a week was very inspiring to see how their minds work and how they want to try to make the Dharma relevant for today, for a contemporary audience. But first, I would like us to start with a reading by Shinran Shonin. If you could please join me in Gasho. Joy, kangi, means to be gladdened in body, kan, and gladdened in heart, gi. It means to rejoice beforehand at being assured of attaining what one shall attain. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, namadats, namadats. I picked that reading today because we'll talk about the details towards the end, but one of the experiences of spending a week very closely working with the minister from Japan and the musician from Japan was an incredible expression of how they think about the Dharma, how they think about how they can reach out to people in different ways. One of the things that I would like to point out is that a lot of people kept calling Techno Hoyo a performance. And I want to make it very clear. So techno is the Japanese word for technology, and Hoyo is service. This service was approved by Honganji, our head temple in Kyoto. And part of it is that's why we had the chanting. That's why we had a Dharma talk. And so there were a lot of very stimulating, sometimes at times overwhelming visual simulations. But the whole point is that it is a service. And I'll talk about the meaning of why the minister that created the service did so, because it's a very personal story that I think should be shared and would shed light on what we were doing. I have to admit that, one of the reasons that I became a Buddhist is that I really do enjoy the contemplative part of this spiritual tradition. I enjoy going into the Hondo. I enjoy silent meditation. I enjoy chanting. And so one of my good friends many, many years ago took me to his church, which was an evangelical church. And people were singing and clapping hands. We're holding each other and we're hugging people. And then he said to me at the end of the service, he goes, "Kurt, what do you think?" And I said, "It was a very nice service." He goes, "Well, do you want to come back?" And I said, "No, it's not my type of service." And he goes, "Oh, you're such a snob. You Buddhists are such snobs." And I said, "Hey, if I was Christian, I'd probably be, a Catholic or something. That's just more of my personality, is I like to have the idea of being silent and contemplating the spirituality." But one of the things that we have to remember is that there are so many different ways of expressing the Dharma. And throughout history, there have been more expressive ways of expressing the teachings. I'll be talking, there actually was dancing involved with one of the services here in the Hondo, which was something interesting for me to behold. But if you look at Japanese history or Japanese Buddhist history, there was a form of Nembutsu that was back in the Nara period, where they actually would have people that would be dancing to and saying the Nembutsu, spinning around on the streets. Maybe to our contemporary eyes, they might have looked a little deranged, but that was one of the ways of expressing the Nembutsu. Another, gosh, somebody keeps ringing the doorbell. I can't stop service, I'm sorry. So we have guests from California upstairs. They just heard the door. Thank you. I'm sorry, but it's very disruptive. So anyway, so they're also with the idea of spreading the Nembutsu. So there was a form of dance. Also, they would hand out amulets. They was very famous for people to write the Nembutsu on pieces of paper or on pieces of scrap wood, and they would give that out to people in the streets. And this is a way of spreading the Nembutsu. So for us, thinking about how we do our services now, how we've been doing them in the United States or how they've been doing them in Japan the last several hundred years, there's been also different types that have been more invocative of dancing, of chanting, and saying the Nembutsu spontaneously. So when I will be very honest, part of my learning curve with this group coming in is that I had to put my ego aside as the residential minister, because they were coming in and they're very respectful about how I felt about the service, but the service was done by their creation. So everything that you saw, or hopefully did see some of it, was completely 100% created by them, including the music, including the visual components. And so coming in, they'd say, "Is this okay?" So I don't know if you saw me, but I was on the Onaiji behind a mesh screen with a speaker in my ear because the techno beats are going faster. So when I learned the Shoshinge, it's like, ga gon cho segan, ga go cho segan, and I'm like, okay, let's get into this. And some of my MAs were there, and we were getting into it. It was really fun, but it was a challenge. I'm sorry, I have to answer this door. I am so sorry. My apologies. I do live in the temple, and so the doorbell's there, and I am trying to be cognizant that people might not want to be outside in New York after dark. So getting back to the performance, so it was very interesting for me to be able to try to experiment with the different rhythms of the chanting. So Reverend Akasaro, who is the person that created Techno Hoyo, he is 17th generation Jodo Shinshu minister. We were talking to him, and his temple is 500 years old. And he says, oh, it's a young temple. And I'm like, okay, I guess maybe in Japan, that's a young temple. But his story is that he is the eldest son. And for those that might not be familiar with the Japanese Buddhist tradition, is that the temples are basically controlled by families. And so the temple, usually it goes to the sons or the ministers, which has changed now. There are female ministers, of course, but also usually the role goes to the oldest male. And in modern era, sometimes that's a very big responsibility that people might not want to do. You're the oldest son, and that means you're going to take over the temple. And Sensei had that feeling. He did not want to take over the temple. He felt that the teachings were not expressing in a way that he could relate to in the contemporary Japanese culture. And he left and went into what we would call the economy. He left the temple and he started working in electronic music, specifically becoming a DJ. This is probably, by his age, I would say probably the late 80s or early 90s. And so he, of course, what do you think his parents are going to do? Do you think they're just going to let their eldest son just disappear? You need to come back. You need to come back. Please come back to the temple. And what happened for him is that I think that again, there's a communication problem. My Japanese is very limited. His English was more limited than my Japanese. And if we didn't have a direct translator with Chemi Sensei, sometimes it could be a little rough. But basically, he came to the realization that what he learned with the working in the electronic music industry and the reaction that people were having to this music is that, why don't I try to take this and incorporate it into the Buddhist tradition? Of course, it took many years to develop the techno-hoyo that we see now, but his motivation was very sincere on why he wanted to do this. So he went back to the temple, and I'm sorry, now my cat's out. Oh boy, this is a wild night. So I opened the door, so now Sappy's in here crying, so please excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry, guys, but you should have laughed because I was at Seabrook this last weekend and I was giving a demonstration. I started dancing and I knocked up something over on the Nijing. So I'm kind of on a roll with having technical difficulties here with animals and other beasts. So getting back to, so he went back to the temple and he started incorporating these techniques into the teachings. Now, again, one of the things that was very important is that they wanted to come to New York specifically to do the 9/11 service. And I've mentioned to this group before that 9/11 here for the New York Sangha is a very solemn, very serious service. And so I made it very clear that please, we need to be respectful for the 9/11 service because it is a memorial service. And so they agreed to do that. So the first lunch that we went out to, Chimi Sensei wasn't with us. And so it was myself and a few other people. And with our broken English, we were going back and forth in broken Japanese. And I looked at Sensei, and one of the nice things about when you meet somebody from, a fellow Buddhist is that sometimes the communication is not verbal. Sometimes the communication is not intellectual. So we're sitting outside and it's so cute. They're on Broadway. We're eating a hamburger. They love the juicy hamburger. They're going on and on and on. They were saying, oh, the hamburger is like Zen. I still don't know what they meant by that. But anyway, so I'm sitting there and I'm looking at Sensei and I said, you need to go to Peace Park, and so he had a translator there. And so he typed in Peace Park. And for those that I'm sure you're all aware, that is the site of 9/11 where the towers fell. There is a park there that's very elegant where the two towers were. Or the original footprint is with a waterfall and the names of the over 3,000 people that perished in it. It's a very moving situation. And so I looked at him and he looked at me and he says, I need to go, don't I? I need to go. And I said, yes, you need to go before the service. And this is when I started to appreciate that his level of understanding of the Dharma is very deep. I kind of maybe thought that maybe it would be because of with electric beats and things like that, that it might be not as in depth, but I found out that was the complete opposite, that he thinks everything through. And he realized that if they're going to honor 9/11, they need to go to the site. So the other person that was with us was Mr. Kono, and he is not a minister, he is a musician. He was the gentleman with the red hair and the red glasses. And so he did he would do the electronic music And so he was there too. So we went down. 9/11 was on Wednesday. And so we went down on Monday. And it was fairly busy down there because they're setting up for the big festivities. So for those that might not know, that they read every name. It takes hours. They read every name on 9/11 for those who have perished, and now for those who have perished because of their injuries or health issues related to what they had as well from the going and helping people during the devastation. So we go down there and we went with David Brady, who is the president here of New York. And he's a New Yorker, born and raised on Long Island, even though he's got family by Ekoji. And so it was very poignant because we went to places where there were his friends that perished. And so here we go. We went with our fuhos. We're going to do a chant where we did the Jusei. And so we're going around, and all of a sudden, Mr. Kono started crying uncontrollably. He had to sit by the side and just take care of himself because he was so overwhelmed with the experience of what was there. And again, I understood that, the idea for those that, places where trauma has happened, they say that that energy remains. And I do believe that because, I'm not a New Yorker, and every time I've gone there, it's very tearful experience. Chris knows a wonderful couple that we have at Placer Buddhist Church. The wife is Japanese American, and the husband, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, is Jewish. And they believed in this very firmly. So they went to Auschwitz together to experience that. And then they went to the different camps in America, the Japanese American camps, to experience that. And so we do the service, and then Sensei breaks down in the middle of chanting. It was very, very emotional. And when I experienced that, we were all solemn. I was crying too. And I'm not doing this to say melodramatic. I think this idea is that when we talk about, we chanted the Jusei for his friend who perished in the devastation, and David was very appreciative. And I think that gave the impetus for what the beautiful service that we had on Wednesday evening. But getting back to the idea, I started off, I don't mean this to be a sad occasion, but we did celebrate and honor those who have passed on in 9/11. But getting back to the Tekno Hoya service and this idea of tange or joy, is that every night the service was different, which was a challenge for me, trying to learn the different chants and learn to do that. But what they did is they wanted to see the people's reaction. So on Tuesday night, the night before 9/11, I was talking to Michael earlier, it's kind of like a rave. And so they had the techno beats and they encouraged people to dance. And again, this was an interesting thing because we had a lot of younger members, people that were not members coming from Colombia. And so we had a lot younger group. And so the idea of dancing to these techno beats was something that they could relate to. I'm sorry, the doorbell just keeps ringing and ringing. Okay. But what it was is that for me in the Onaijin, I'm sitting there and then people start dancing and I couldn't see very clearly. They had done it the night before, but on Tuesday night, they were uninhibitedly dancing. And it was an interesting thing for me to experience because coming from my contemplative background, it was like, I had a mixed feeling about how they danced, but they were expressing themselves. And then I found out later that some of our older members were participating in the dancing too. And that they said that this was a way for them to express the Nembutsu in a way that they never conceptualized before. We always think about the Nembutsu as being, verbal. I've said in other talks that the Nembutsu traditionally has also been a meditative, a contemplative practice, and that it's not only reciting, but it's also performing or dancing. And so the younger members were very excited and they came back for the Wednesday service, which was more somber. But what they did was they expressed that also was meaningful to them. So this idea of kangi is, like we mentioned before, I used this word when we talked about the Obon festival, that when we do dancing for Obon Dori, that is the time for us to express this joyfulness about the Nembutsu and us being exposed to the Buddhist teachings. And as I said, kan means body, kangi means body, and then gi means heart. And so what it means is that specifically, for those that are Japanese files, that this refers to the settlement of our rebirth. That's one of the reasons why they use the word kangi for obon, is because we are there and we're celebrating that we have been exposed to the Nembutsu, that we can express our gratitude that we have been given this to us by Amida Buddha. So tonight, when we have our discussion, I'd like us to open it up. And I know that Michael always says we don't have to talk about what I discussed, but I would love to hear your views about how you would feel about people dancing in the Hondo, about your view about people doing different types of services. You know, is there a reason why that we have done services the same certain ways for so many years? And in fact, there are liturgical reasons why we do it the way we do. But I'd like to open it up in this idea of joy. You know, this idea of tange, do we personally, in our experience with the Nembutsu, do we feel that on a personal level when we go to temple or when we reflect upon our loved ones that have passed on, or how does that manifest in our life? So if I'd like to conclude with the words of Shinran Shonin, if you could please join me in Gasho. Joy, tange, means to be gladdened in body, kan, and gladdened in heart, gi. It means to rejoice beforehand at being assured of attaining what one shall attain. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo. So if you could please join me in reading our pledge that was dropped into the box. Okay, our pledge. Breaking out of my shell, I will share a warm smile and speak gentle words, just like the kind Buddha. Not becoming lost in my greed, anger, and ignorance, I shall think and act with an open mind, just like the calm and peaceful Buddha. Not putting myself first, I will share in the joy and sadness of others, just like the compassionate Buddha. Realizing the gift of life I have received, I shall strive to live each day to its fullest, like the Buddha who tirelessly works to liberate all. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Great. All right, now I'd like to finish up with another quick sitting meditation. So if you could please sit on your chair firmly with your straight back and your shoulders relaxed. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, namadats, namadats.